Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I am your host, Ray Harkins, and I'm sitting here with a new microphone, trying a little new mic, see how this sounds. But anyways, we're at episode number 48, and the guest this week is Doc Coyle, the guitarist from New Jersey metal band God Forbid. I realized that I had another New Jersey metal band last week, so we're pretty metal as of late, but it'll be delving into some different stuff shortly, so keep your eyes and ears peeled. Anyways, propertyofzach.com. We'll get some business out of the way first. They are a great site. Go visit them a lot, find out about what bands are doing, find out about what independent culture is happening and popping. They did some great coverage on South by Southwest, and just go there to be up to date on everything. Shout out to our editor, Tom Richfield. He is doing a killer job, and hopefully the audio quality will keep on improving. I'm doing things now more professionally than I ever have, so it's awesome. And Tom's got great ideas, so shout out to him. Review the show on iTunes. You can drop some stars or you can drop some sentences. Either way, I've been noticing some people are kind and been dropping some, very nice reviews. And I really do appreciate that. I literally read everyone and go, thank you, in my head or audibly. Sometimes if I know the person, I'm like, hey, thanks, on some social network. So anyways, keep on doing that. I really appreciate that. And secondly, I'll be doing this for a few shows, and I apologize, but this is kind of just the one thing that I'm fixated on currently. So there's a website called theavclub.com, and they do a column called Podmass, which is basically reviews of podcasts. And they do obviously the most gigantic, famous ones, but occasionally they do a show where it says new to us, which is basically just like, oh, hey, this is a new podcast you should check out. I want this show featured on there. That would be incredible. So the only thing you need to do, the listener, would basically be just email them. So the email address is podmass@avclub.com, and just be like, hey, you should listen to 100 Words or Less. It's a great show. There's good interviews, blah, blah, blah. And I think, honestly, if maybe like 10 of you did that, that would be spectacular, because I think that's all they would need in order to be like, oh, hey, someone should check this out. So yes, podmass@avclub.com. If you forget the email address, just find me on Twitter, whatever. I'll remind you. Anyways, before we get into the interview, I have dove into a YouTube hole the other day. And if you haven't done that, I highly recommend it. You can get an hour out of your day being like, oh my God, how did I end up here? So for those of you that don't live in Southern California, because I'm fairly certain that this guy was not nationally syndicated or had any sort of national awareness. He did appear on the Howard Stern show occasionally. But so there's a guy named Wally George. Go to YouTube, type in Wally George. You are up for a treat. But just to put it in context, the dude, it's kind of like, when public access television was a thing. For those of you that don't even know what that means, like, think of the movie Wayne's World, how they were doing a show from their basement, and, just similar to podcasts, where it's like, hey, maybe someone's listening and whatever. They would broadcast that on local television networks on off hours, either really late or it's usually really late. Wally George was a mainstay in the Southern California, public access television. I just always remember, 9, 10, 11, having the TV on, at like midnight or 1 a.m. It was a little bit older, but it was absolutely incredible. It was basically like Jerry Springer before it was Jerry Springer, but it was so lopsided. Basically, whoever the guest was that Wally brought in, he would just completely lampoon them. And usually it was people that you could obviously easily lampoon, from, white supremacists to, racists, whatever. But I'm not going to explain it too much because the videos are just absolutely incredible. They basically got dudes from the beach to fill the audience, and it was just this total hangout atmosphere with this super electric host who was just basically chanting America the whole time. I don't know. It's amazing. And I'm really glad that I experienced this. And I'm sure so many of you have these other random stories of like, there was this guy on late night television and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not talking, obviously, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Johnny Carson, stuff like that. This is like deep dive. Anyways, go do that, and your life will be better because of that. Anyways, Doc Coyle. God forbid, they've been a band for a long time, and at this point, there should be no reason that they're continuing to put out records as far as the mass media, we recycle bands every 10 minutes mentality is concerned. But they're an incredible band. I will regale a story to Doc in regards to the first time that I heard the band. But yeah, we talked about race because he's a black man and he plays in a metal band, and that doesn't happen very often. So we talked about that. We talked about longevity and his motivation to create art. So yeah, he's a great dude, and I hope you learned something from this because he definitely dominates the conversation, which is awesome because that's what I want on this whole show. So he definitely guides you through a lot of stuff. So check it out, and I'll talk to you after.
In the bar, and you end up getting in some really fascinating conversations.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point too. So yeah, usually I like to start things off with just kind of my own personal sort of entry point into you as a person and your musical output over the years and stuff. It was definitely around the time when God forbid put out Determination. Like it was shortly before that, because being from the West Coast, like bands that were on the East Coast, like, it took a moment for the news to trickle out here to be like, oh, check this band out, they're awesome. But I distinctly remember like leaving a show at like the Key Club in Hollywood and being handed one of the Candiria, God forbid, tapes, like a sampler tape with like 2 songs from Determination.
The now legendary sampler tape.
Dude, it's so funny because it's like, you can always, like, especially people like you and I have been involved for music for way too long, where it's like you kind of forget how important those, like, samplers or whatever are, where it's just like, that's like, I still remember that. Like, and so I remember listening to it and being like, holy shit, like, what is this? Because, like, obviously most people will say to you, it's like, you guys combined, like, a lot of the, sort of hardcore elements that, a lot of bands in the mid-90s did, but then you obviously kind of pushed it forward with the love for, the Swedish death metal and all that type of stuff. And I just remember being so, like, taken aback and being like, why have I not heard of this band? And I need to find as much out as I possibly can. So did that tape you find, like, more than one person has been like, oh, Doc, like, that tape turned me on to your band?
Well, it's that era of the band is really kind of paradoxical in a lot of ways, because it was the era in which a big portion of people found out about the band, and it's also the era where we first started hitting the road and touring, and just really, like, we went for broke. For some reason, from our perspective, like, that album cycle was kind of like, it didn't meet our expectations. So in a lot of ways, we never really got to connect with the impact of that album the way I think a lot of people did. And it didn't really become apparent to us till, like, several years later, after it came out, that Determination had a really big impact on a certain sect of music fans. And then by that time, we had kind of went in another direction somewhat, Yeah. So, but that was, it's funny you bring up the sampler tapes. It's like, that was 2001. So you really got to remember, people having demo tapes at their shows was only like 2 years before that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So having an actual sampler tape with, like, Century Media Records, and then obviously Candiria was a, groundbreaking band. Yeah. And that was like, we were like the new band on that sampler. Like, yeah. I mean, half people were getting that, oh, let me check out these new Candiria tunes. And then they got to check us out too. I remember they handed them out at New England Metal Fest that year.
Oh, yeah.
And that was back when, like, New England Metal Fest, like, if you had a good set in New England that had an impact in the heavy metal world, like, it's kind of spread around, like, yo, that band really killed it. And, it had reverberations in terms of the industry. Yeah. And, it was a much smaller bubble, I'd say, of influence, and it would take, like you said, a while before things reached to the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
and there'd be like these little pockets, of scenes like where people were kind of in the know. It's like, in like Orange County, it's like we didn't even know this at the time, and then like a couple years after that, like Atreyu took us on tour,
Mm-hmm.
and they were like huge fans, and they would like give us like, we had taken Avenged Sevenfold out, like maybe like a year after Determination came out, and they were just giving us like all these stories of how like we're like legends in. Like, yo, man, you guys are huge in OC. I'm like, right, sure.
Right, sure, whatever.
At the time, we like on that part of the reason why we didn't think that album was really successful was it actually sold a good amount of records. I think we had at that time, I think we'd sold like 15 or 20,000 copies, which was really good for an underground band. But we weren't really like doing really great headlining shows. Like people weren't really coming out to the shows, so it was hard to feel like how it was like that tour. We did a tour. It was us headlining, Bleeding Through as main support, and Avenged Sevenfold opened.
Sure.
And this was like I think the end of summer 2002, and it was like 50 people every night just shot, and most of them were there for Bleeding Through.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But we sold all these records. We toured with Opeth's first tour ever with Nevermore. We toured Cradle of Filth in their first U.S. tour. We toured 6 Feet Under and Lamb of God. We toured with Guar. We toured with Hatebreed.
Right. You're like, we did all this stuff, but why is nobody coming to see us?
We did everything that we thought we could do. And at the time, we actually had this management company called the Syndicate managing us, and they also managed Shadows Fall. And Shadows Fall, had put out Of One Blood like a year earlier and kind of did the same thing we did. They did every tour, they busted their ass, and they had like, I think they had sold like 10,000 more records, but like that 10,000 to like our manager and the label was like, yeah, they're the big dogs. You guys are you're the backup team. We need you. And they were like a little more commercial. They had some of the clean vocals and stuff, and it was always kind of put in this narrative that part of the reason why we weren't breaking through was because we were a little too edgy, a little too heavy, a little too weird. And I think somehow that might have burrowed into our brains a little bit when we were possibly like writing the next record.
Yeah.
And that's it's a weird thing. Like, you can never go back and kind of rewrite the storybook on how a band ends up sounding like they're going to sound like or where they're going to be. But I've such an interesting relationship with all of our albums because they're all so different, and there's such a different mindset behind every album, and I think every mindset was legitimized.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you see why the band reacted how they did, like you said, with each record because of, a set of circumstances, a set of experiences. So, yeah, no, I totally get that. But before we dive too deep into that, I want to know you, Doc. So, born and raised, were you, born on the East Coast in Jersey? Like, is that where you kind of cut your teeth?
Yeah, I was born in Rahway, New Jersey, but grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Of course.
Which is the home of Rutgers University, which made it a really kind of a cool city because it was a small city. I think like at the time the population was only about 50,000 people. It was the environment was pretty it was a collegiate environment. So even though I never went to Rutgers, you kind of felt like you were there was more culture there than I'd say some just like crappy ghetto in Jersey. And we also had like some neighbors, that were like grad students. So it was kind of part of, it was kind of the backdrop of growing up. And it's, I can't really even talk about growing up without talking about my brother Dallas, who was in the band, because he's only like a year older than me, and we basically were like attached at each other's hips from the time I was born till we were 30 years old. So
right. What did so yeah, as you were growing up, well, is it just you two guys as far as like siblings are concerned?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did your parents do like as you were growing up, and like what was the family structure like?
Well, the family structure was a little weird. So me and my brother are mixed race. We're half black and half white. And my father was and still is a piano player, and my mother was a singer, and they actually met as playing in the same band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this goes back to like the 70s. And my mother was like a jazz singer. They never got married. And if you were to meet them today, you would think they're about as different people as you could ever meet.
Sure.
So they split when I was like 5, and then lived with my mother for a few years, and then eventually my father got custody, and we pretty much just lived with our father from the time I was like 9 or 10 till till I was growing up.
Sure. Obviously, as you were kind of, growing up and started to understand, like, oh, hey, like, my friend's parents are married or whatever, like, how did that sit with you? Or was it just like, oh, this is kind of normal for what I'm used to?
Well, I think, we never had a lot, like I think when you're a kid and you're kind of poor, you don't really know you're poor.
Right. Sure.
Until you go around people that maybe have more than you, and still to this day, my approach to that is that, you just be thankful for whatever you do have. If you, as a philosophy, are always just kind of trying to keep up with the Joneses or are always focused on what you don't have, then it's going to be very hard to be happy at anything.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, so it was my father basically raising us by himself as a piano teacher. So he'd be gone all day. Me and my brother would kind of be left to our own devices.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that he was doing his best, and I knew he loved us, and I didn't begrudge that at all. Like, I don't know, like I think some of that kind of like baby boomer stuff, like, oh, my parents weren't there for me. Dad didn't play catch with me, cat in the cradle stuff,
Right.
That's cool, and it's nice you're kind of, taking your inventory, but being a parent's hard, paying the rent is hard.
Sure.
And, and thinking about my father, he had a teaching degree, so he could have taught regular school. He really wanted to run his own business. And my father's a really, really unique guy. He's, just a true artist, and he knows he's the most well-read person I know. He has a wall full of books, and he's actually read them all. Some, culturally, a guy, he identifies with Black culture probably more than he does with white culture, which is very unique. But I don't mean that like in his mannerisms or like the way he dressed or anything. It's just that's his. I knew when it was Louis Armstrong's birthday or Duke Ellington's birthday, that would be on the radio. And my dad, he made sure to constantly be educating me in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was showing me and my brother the Marx Brothers or old Muhammad Ali fights, or documentaries on the Holocaust or the Great Depression, and really kind of giving me as much ammo in terms of than I was getting at school.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like obviously like not everybody, even though like you said, you came from modest means, your dad was obviously, he understood that, for whatever he couldn't give you monetarily, he was obviously trying to culture, you and your brother and be like, hey, here's some cool stuff that, you should be aware of. And like, because obviously it's like, it's that delicate balance of like, looking at how parents are. All right, I have to show my kids like what I would define as cool and like, what they should know, but obviously not forcing it on them. So they'll be like, oh, fuck you, dad. Like, I'm going to get into my own shit. That'll happen later, obviously, but.
The thing is though, my dad, he was, he at the same time, he was listening to Public Enemy and Rage Against the Machine and Pearl Jam and Nirvana. He was just a cool motherfucker, and he still is, like my dad, this dude went to the library and took out Tupac CDs, and he's like, Doc, you gotta listen to this Tupac. This stuff is great.
So good.
Yeah, the dude's just the shit. He played on a couple of our records.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did for Earth's Blood. He did the intro, the piano intro, and then he did a piece on a song called "The Lonely Dead" on Constitution of Treason.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, that's obviously awesome that you're able to, experience that as a true family, so to speak.
Coin the term "dad forbid."
Right. I love it. And so, obviously, as you were, kind of growing up and your formative years, like obviously, for one, music was an important part of your life. So, as you started to transition to like high school and stuff like that, what sort of, were you into sports or like what were you doing at that time?
It was weird because if you look at me now, you'd think I would have been like a track star or football or something because I'm 6'2", like 200 pounds, in pretty good shape. But I had no coordination when I was really young. So like I tried to play baseball and I couldn't do it, didn't like it, and I was kind of a little kind of chubby kid or whatever. And then my first year of high school, I discovered basketball and started playing. But I wasn't really good. It wasn't until my sophomore year that I actually started playing on the team, and I was pretty obsessed with basketball. I still am. I still play. I do. I don't know if you see my NBA blog.
I have.
Metal sucks, So I'm nerdy about that. No, I think for me, I think about my high school years as definitely being an awkward kid, and maybe that wasn't the way the world saw me, but that's maybe I think how I saw me as and maybe to this day as someone who never truly fits in, and maybe that has something to do with being biracial. I'm also I think I have a loner streak in me, and anytime a group of people coalesce around a set ideas, I immediately become wary of it and suspicious. And I hate groupthink. Even as a kid, like I just didn't understand. I didn't understand gangs. I was like, so what? You hang out together for what? I don't. I never really felt the. Actually, the first time I felt comfortable somewhere was when I discovered the hardcore scene. And to this day, I'll tell everyone, me and my brother, we were metal guys. We favored heavy metal music. The way we got into music was Metallica, Pantera, Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, Sepultura, Slayer. And then we discovered the hardcore scene. I would have described myself as a hardcore kid, but a metalhead. Like musically, I still didn't even really like, even when I was going to hardcore shows every weekend, I didn't really even like that many hardcore bands. It was more about, these are the first group of people that I actually feel comfortable around.
Sure. Yeah, you gravitated towards the sense of community because, even though obviously metal music has their own community, it's far removed.
Not at that time. There was there was no metal. As far as living in central New Jersey in the mid to late 90s, there was no metal scene.
Got it.
I didn't go. My first show I ever went to was 1996 with Pantera, White Zombie, Deftones at what's now called the Izod Center, where like the New Jersey Nets used to play. And huge, whatever, 12, 13,000 people, how many people were there. And then the next show I went to was a hardcore show, and I didn't go to another like big metal show for probably like 3 or 4 years.
Got it.
Even though that was like my roots, it was hard to identify with that because it seemed so bigger than anything you could touch. There wasn't a lot. I remember going to the Pantera show being scared,
right?
And like you watch the Pantera videos and stuff, and you're like, I was worried there was gonna be like white power people there, and like. Because that was like the vibe it kind of put off. Like it didn't matter to me. Like it's not like I was like, oh, Pantera hates me or whatever. It's just you definitely have these. There's so many kind of cultural avenues you have to walk down. It's like think about this. I was me and my brother, 2 half black kids growing up in a city, all black and Hispanic people with a white father who liked black culture, but then we got into heavy metal where there were no black people there.
Yeah, you guys were. It's like you're like a niche of a segment of a niche. Like,
I think it's funny. So we went to high school, right? And we liked metal. By the time we got to high school, we had like discovered music and stuff. When you're a little kid, you don't really have that kind of things. But we were, because of the environment, it was kind of a secret. There was really no one to talk about it with. I think I had one friend that I could talk about metal with. Then we ended up going to private school with all rich white kids, and they didn't like metal either.
Weird.
They liked, Dave Matthews Band, Biggie Smalls, and that thing of just never really quite fitting in
Right.
anywhere, and being, somewhat of a an outlier.
Yeah, no, that I could easily see that. Well, I mean, it's cool that you obviously were able to kind of insert yourself into, like you said, the hardcore community and be like involved in that. So, did you always have a desire to be like, all right, I want to play in a band. I would like to play in a band with my brother because, like you said, you guys were attached at the hip. Like, how did that genesis come? Where once you saw bands play, you were like, yo, I need to do this.
Well, I just think, and maybe you identify with this a little bit. I think when being nerdy about something, when you're complete, like when you get into it, you're into it 100%.
Yeah.
And that's how, once we discovered guitar and started playing, we just sat in our at home and just didn't leave the house. It's all we did was play guitar and listen to metal and rock records. Basically, so before we discovered guitar, me and my brother used to draw comic books. That's what we were obsessed about. And so then we traded that obsession for the musical obsession, and which was cool because at least theoretically from watching like Wayne's World, stuff like that, you're like, yeah, that could probably get you laid. So that was kind of cool. There was at least a cool factor to playing guitar. So our best friend that we drew comic books with, his cousin, I guess they were like, oh yeah, they jam, they play metal, and you guys should go jam with them. So then like one Saturday afternoon, we just went over their house and met Corey, who was our drummer, and Byron, our singer, and that was in 1996.
So essentially, like, I mean, God forbid was like your first band. Like
it was the first we ever played with.
That's crazy.
We never played with anyone else. Like outside of, like, there was just some like like I said, like the college students, like the grad students that were friends with our, they were older. They were like, they were like adults, and they were like, they were like in their late 20s, and they like show us some guitar stuff. But it wasn't like we were jamming. But we never had any aspirations of like being in a band. I think it's just this thing where it just happened, and we jammed, and it wasn't even good.
Oh no! If you were good, I would call you a liar.
But we wasn't even good. But it was like, I guess we could do that again, and so we kind of just periodically would go back and keep jamming, and that developed into like recording a demo, and then that developed into another demo, and that developed into playing a show, which the show sucked, and we sucked, so we kind of didn't do it for a while, and then me and my brother really started vibing with Corey, and we kept writing, and it was just it was a slow process, but there was never a goal of like, we're going to be a band. I didn't think that was even a thing,
right,
that you could be. I really liked playing. I think our only goal was just to be good, because we were in the scene. When we discovered the hardcore scene, we actually saw some really good bands that we could actually talk to the people. We could hang out with the people. It was like, I couldn't hang out with Pantera. I couldn't sit in on Sepultura's rehearsal, analyze why they were good and how they got that good,
Uh-huh.
So we started, so we just started going to a million shows and watching great. The first show we ever went to was the Candiria show in 90. It was in 97, 96 or 97, and it was like this band For the Love Of.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. So For the Love Of was like, that was the band that inspired us to be good, because they were the best band that we had ever seen like in person.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, and that we want to be like that. So if you want to know about like early God Forbid, basically we're like all the classic metal influences, the thrash, the death metal, the Swedish stuff mixed with For the Love Of.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting too, because like obviously during the mid to late 90s, like that's when, like you were talking about, the sort of the hardcore scene was definitely changing, where it's like, that's obviously when the term metalcore started to become like more prevalent. And so it's funny because usually you hear the kind of first band stories of like, oh, we just wanted to play, like we could care less of like the execution of it. But you guys, I like the fact that you guys took a different approach, where we're just like, we know that we're limited by our talents or lack thereof. So, but we just want to make this good. I like that idea where it's like, we just want to be good, rather than, hey, like we just want to play. We want to play a show. Like, we want to be good before we really take it quote unquote out there, even though out there could mean just a show in a basement, obviously.
Well, the thing is though, individually we were good.
Okay.
Like we knew right away. Like even though me and my brother, we hadn't been playing guitar that long, but we had been so dedicated about it. By the time it's like the fucking Bill and Ted when they like go in the time machine, they come back and they have beards and they can shred.
Right.
We were 16. Like we went in the time machine for like 2 or 3 years, and we weren't great, but we noticed that we were pretty much better than most of the people in the hardcore scene.
Got it.
At the time, because A, because we were just nerds, you know, and B, our influences, like at that time, like people thought metal was dead. People could not believe that we were playing guitar solos.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh man, you guys play guitar solos, man. That's crazy, man."
Right.
Like people don't understand. Like it was like even hardcore people were like afraid to admit they liked metal. The only metal band hardcore kids would admit they liked was Slayer.
Slayer, right.
You know, and then everyone would cover Rain and Blood, and then everyone would go crazy like you threw a bomb in the pit.
Right.
That's why someone covers Rain and Blood now, I like literally put my nose in the air. It's like, man, dude, that shit was hacky like 12 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you know.
Can't you find some other songs? Like, how about you just cover Roots? Like, do something else.
Yeah, but you know, Throwdown already did Roots.
Exactly.
Too good. So I wasn't fair because we did Ozfest with Throwdown, and they played Roots on it. I'm like, that ain't fair. You can't play a song everybody knows.
That's funny. You're like, I want to revoke that.
They were like a company like inflating their stock artificially.
Sure.
It wasn't fair.
They were doing insider trading.
Because they did it so good too. Like they fucking sounded, you know, in some ways almost better than Soulfly. How good they did it. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
I love Dave's voice. That dude's one of my favorite. Like his voice is one of my favorite like heavy metal singers ever.
Oh yeah, he definitely has a talent when it comes to that. I definitely wanted to hit on the topic, obviously, like we were talking about, of race, because you know it was extremely interesting for people to, you know, once God forbid started to, like you said, make a name for yourself, hit the road, and you know, when you were like, the metal scene is notorious as far as, like you were saying, the perception of like people viewing, you know, black people like that. You know, I can't say it any plainer than that, where it was like, I don't know if they're actually quote unquote welcome at these shows, especially, you know, if you're talking about the whole South atmosphere. You know, did you yourself encounter any of that sort of like, I mean, not like people were maybe coming up to you and being like, oh, I hate your band because you're black. But, you know, was that a vibe that you felt, or was it one of those things where it was just like, if you did feel it, you just pushed through it?
No, I mean, New Jersey is, you know, the Northeast in general, I think is really diverse. You're used to being around everyone. Like I remember when I was in grade school, I was in like these advanced classes called Gifted and Talented. So everyone else in the school, they would switch classes every year. So they'd have different, you know, they have different kids. But I went from like 3rd grade to 8th grade. I had the same class. And it was me, one white kid, one black kid, one Dominican kid, and one Indian kid. Like boys. And we were all friends. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I grew up with. And I thought, even back then, you know, and you know, coming from like my dad, who is, you know, lefty as lefties get, and coming from my background, I thought that's the way the world was. I was like, yeah, we're all together, Martin Luther King, baby. You know,
yeah.
I was like, you know, it's like, does racism exist? No, everyone loves each other.
That's amazing.
You know, and that's the way I thought. I think that's something you know, and especially kids, you know, if you put kids in that environment, they don't think any different. It's like how you grow up. You know, if you grow up and there's no diversity, and you don't know how other people live, and the only thing you see is the news media or television or movies, you're going to form your own opinions, especially if you have parental guidance in there that could be bad or good.
Yeah.
So you know, coming up, that was never an issue for me, because I think just the environment was fairly enlightened. And even as a band early on, I think if anything early on, especially, it helped because at least we had like a story.
Right.
know, whereas like not, a lot of bands, they were just another band.
Yeah, it's five white dudes getting up there and playing, and like that doesn't, there's nothing really unique about that.
Yeah, the funny thing is, if you go like, I mean, I don't know if you can find, but you can find like an old like show review when we first came out. Like like, so this guy came up, and I think they're gonna start playing reggae or something, and they come out and they cover At the Gates, and I couldn't believe it. Like it was like there was like a factor of people just being stunned.
Right.
That's what came out of the people. It just broke a lot of conventions, and even to this day, I mean, outside of maybe Suffocation, but even that, there was really only two black guys in the band where they're just, we might be the only one of the few like, really mostly black bands in extreme music, that I know about even to this day. And we never quote unquote blacked up our music.
Right.
It wasn't like, all right, man, we're gonna throw a hip hop beat in here and get a DJ.
Right.
We were never trying to appeal to black culture. Our musical preferences were real metal and was real heavy music. And it wasn't like we didn't like hip hop. We did. That's where we grew up. We all, if you come hang on, God forbid, we were listening to Wu-Tang and we were listening to Dr. Dre and Ice Cube and NWA. We liked all that stuff. We liked everything,
Yeah.
But that wasn't what we wanted to play.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that definitely makes sense from the context of, where you were coming from. And obviously, I know you heard the joke being thrown around about, God forbid, obviously being true black metal. And like, I know that
we kind of, that was like that's something people would say, like, kind of like telling, hey, you guys are the best black metal band I've ever seen. Right. And it was like, yeah, real funny, motherfucker.
Right.
But then we made a T-shirt basically coining that. And we basically came with that idea to steal Dimmu Borgir's kind of imagery, but then use it for us. So we took their pentagram they had on the Death Called Armageddon album and then put like an Africa symbol behind it. And then superimposed our faces onto like real black metal dudes' bodies and gave each other like black metal names. Just like,
of course,
'cause it's one of those things like poking fun at yourself and
totally. And that's what, like, I mean, I always know that anytime that sort of came up, like, as far as, if someone would mention it in like a message board and like to try to be offensive or whatever, it's like, that no one, like, just because you guys address it and you're not, bashful about it, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a joke. Like, I get it. That's funny.
Yeah, I think for us, it's never, it's not something we really spend a whole lot of time thinking about. I think, perhaps maybe 5 or 6 years ago when the band was really, really active and really kind of on that verge of possibly breaking out to that next level and becoming a really, really big band. I think they were definitely analyzing, how do I break the band? How do we market the band? How come we're not, this band is selling X amount of merchandise and we're selling this amount? Why, what I'm saying? Like, I was really trying to break down, how come we weren't maybe making as much progress as a Shadows Fall or a Lamb of God and stuff. And to this day, like, I still wonder, if race had something to do with that in terms of at a, at a hateful level, but just the fact that you go and play Columbus, Ohio on a Tuesday, and the people that come out to that show, they just might personally, and we did gigs, like that 6 Feet Under tour with us and Lamb of God. Lamb of God was basically just as well known as we were, but they just connected better, and maybe there's something there where you might connect a little more with something that you personally just identify with. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just it's like being the Jonas Brothers. It helps that you're young, trying to connect to young people. It's just the identifier factor.
Yeah, well, you look at someone, and obviously if they like look like you and they dress like you, it's like there's that immediate, whatever. I don't even know if I'd call it a level of trust, but yeah, like you said, an identifier.
Yeah, and you could even go, and that's in a sense marketing. It's like, once we started doing all the metal tours and stuff coming out of the hardcore world, we started to quote unquote dress more metal and to try and kind of clue into the metalheads. I'm like saying, hey, we're a metal band over here. And that's just a way of of identifying yourself. So people can say, oh yeah, they're one of us. And that, and even all those bands that that came out of that scene in the hardcore scene, where even if you sounded metal, the bands didn't look metal.
Sure.
It was like, it was short hair, it was like button up t-shirts, and, guys look like emo guys, like UFC Zayo, and they look like emo kids, playing like super, super heavy music. And it was like all, for us, especially early on, it was like that dichotomy of trying to balance where we came from and then trying to transition into being like a straight up metal band. Now, I still to this day kind of question how, if we actually even manage that well.
Right. Well, it's funny because, not to interrupt your train of thought, but I've always, like, in working with you at Century Media, and then also just obviously watching your band progress throughout, the career, is the fact that I've always, like, especially from, in working with you and seeing how you operated business wise, I always really did respect the mindset in which you approached these, everything with the band. Like, you were always realistic, and you were very calculated in your approach. And I think that was like, even hearing you just talk about it right now, it's like it's never coming from a point of anger. Like, you're obviously not reflecting on how the band has performed, and you're like, oh well, fuck that, like, because obviously that just will make you a bitter, jaded person. But yeah, I find that whole thought process, like, really interesting, because all you're doing is just asking questions like, oh, I wonder what would have been if this was different.
Well, I mean, that's a tough game to play, because I think everyone in their life can do that. You say, well, what if I would have went to this school, or what if I would have moved here? What if I wouldn't, would have dated that person, and, truth be told, your life would be different. And it's hard to say, but all in all, I think things and are the way they are, and I'm not, I'm the catalog, I'm proud of all of our albums. We worked really hard in every single one of them and tried to do something that made us, some kind of statement on it, and just being, being who we are, from a race standpoint. Like I did a documentary called Electric Purgatory, kind of about the plight of the black rock musician. And I went to some random show in Brooklyn, and a black musician came up to me, said he saw me in the documentary and how, inspired he was, and was really happy that we're like kind of, waving the flag, and, little things like that. I think, or even like if you watched Metal Headbanger's Journey.
Oh yeah.
He did like the, the heavy metal family tree, and he had, us in the new wave of American heavy metal. And to me, that means, hey, we're part of history. And that means something, to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the another interesting thing too, because obviously when you guys were doing the largest festivals, you were touring with every band, and there was a lifestyle that was synonymous with. I mean, regardless of what musical scene you're in, it's the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll type of stuff. And even though I'm sure your band had its fair share of fun times, you guys never seemed, I guess, swallowed by that, or like that the focus was lost, even if you were obviously participating in some of those finer things in life, quote unquote.
I don't know. I mean, we were a pretty hard partying band. Like when we did Ozfest, everyone came to our bus. I don't know. I think we did enjoy that.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not saying that you did not. Right.
Very much so.
Yeah. But I guess from my perspective and just an outsider's perspective, it didn't seem like you were swallowed by it in the sense of that there was you lost focus on what you were doing in regards to the way that the band was operating.
Hope not.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's tough for you to have a perspective on that, just because that time may have been so hazy for you. But that's the perception that I got, where it was like, because obviously you see a lot of bands, especially younger bands, once they start to kind of get a taste of success, however large or small that success may be, sometimes it's like they end up drinking themselves into oblivion, And maybe you guys did that, but you were just able to kind of turn the corner, so to speak.
I think that's much harder to do now because of the way the music industry is now. In order to even get anywhere, you have to be kind of self-sufficient. And there's very few caretakers. Like back in the day, Guns N' Roses, they could be heroin addicts and drunks, but they had a $1 million record deal. and the label was invested in the band, and they knew that these are the way rock musicians are, and they were willing to spend a bunch of money to keep them afloat to protect their investment, and then management gets involved, and the management babysits the band, and now there's that security blanket doesn't exist. Those big contracts don't exist. Other people aren't necessarily there to facilitate your bad habits, and as a band, you have to be a good accountant these days. You have to be able to web designer. You have to be, do your own t-shirt designs and make sure, and run. You have to be able to, do the social network. You have to basically run your operation well on your own before labels even want to touch you. And then once they do touch you, like I said, the advances aren't what they used to be, and the leash isn't as long as it used to be. So in this environment, I don't think we ever would have had it. Guns N' Roses probably would not have survived today. Motley Crue would not have survived because there's not enough money.
Yeah.
So now the bands that break through are like bands like Periphery and like, Protest the Hero. They're nerdy about their music, but they're also nerdy about the way they run their stuff. They're very organized and very diligent. And I think that's the model, at least for underground music. I mean, I think there's still, there still are kind of more, maybe seedier rock and roll bands that have a little more that swagger, but they're not quite as prevalent as they used to be.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And like you were alluding to earlier in regards to, obviously, like you said, you played in a band with your brother. That's never easy. Like, I don't care like how close you are to a sibling. I mean, I'm an only child, and I can look at that and be like, holy fuck. Like, the fact that you guys were able to, honestly, last as long as you did, because, so he separated from the band. What year was that?
April 2009.
Right. And so, like I said, the fact
you were there, right?
That's when I was taking care of you guys. And I mean, I remember that all like going down and, hearing about it. I definitely, honestly, like I said, I was surprised just from an outsider's perspective that was able to last as long as it did because just of the sheer proximity to one another. You guys were brothers. You lived it. And like you said, you were attached at the hip. So what do you think made it last as long as it did? Because at some point, obviously, it would dissolve, and not in a bad way, but it just happens.
Yeah, me and my brother were intertwined in a lot of ways. Up until when I was like 25, me and my brother were almost like married to each other. Like we didn't have girlfriends and stuff like
right.
And I don't we were hugging up on each other. It was just we were so dedicated to like what we were doing in the big picture that everything else was peripheral and it was on the back burner. We shared the same. We lived in the same room until we were like 22. We shared the same wardrobe.
So good. Did you have bunk beds? That would make it even better.
I mean, when we were way younger, but there was like a codependency there that wasn't probably healthy as adults. That would eventually have to kind of work its way out, and maybe it didn't. Maybe it couldn't have worked its way out in a clean way. So maybe that was kind of bound to happen one way or another because you grow up. And you realize, I need to like kind of live my own life and do, and you get the urges of what grown-ups really want to do. And Dallas just went hard the opposite direction and got married and had a kid. And, you talk to him, he'll say he basically had the kid so he could leave the band because there was no other way that he could. He told me he couldn't leave the band like normal. He couldn't just be like, hey guys, I got to go, like, because it's a calling. It's one. We thought we really thought we were going to be one of the biggest bands in the world.
Right.
We thought there was like a. So I think the reason why it lasted. So it was obviously our connection, but there was a chemistry. In the band that was, and musically that was pretty undeniable.
No, I get it. Yeah, basically it was just like you guys. I mean, obviously most humans come to this point when they are, like you said, you feel like you want to grow up. Your brother Dallas had to have a monumental event such as having a kid in order to be able to like separate himself from everything he's known for so long.
And keep in mind, it wasn't just him. We had the same 5 members from 1998 to 2009.
Right.
So there was a family construct, and there is a much, far more than like a pragmatic reasoning to be together. There was, there's deep emotional connections there.
Right.
That it's not this easy thing to say, oh, for anyone just like, yeah, fuck you guys, I'm out of here. So there was, that was my entire adult life. I started touring when I was 20 years old, and I did it. My last tour was 2 months ago.
Right.
So, so that's my adulthood. That's my adult education. That's my experience. I don't really know anything else.
Yeah. Did you have any sense of? I mean, obviously now, like you said, God forbid, I mean, you still tour, and you tour when it makes sense, because obviously, like you said, people are at different points in their lives where they want to dedicate their time to other endeavors or whatever. For you yourself, where do you want the trajectory to take you? Because I mean, you've always struck me as a very obviously ambitious person, and a person that will be involved in music no matter what. So what I guess, what does the future hold for you personally? Where would you like to end up in 5-10 years or whatever?
Currently writing music for a rock project that like basically I've this whole time I've been into metal. I've equally been a big fan of rock music, but I never really had much of an outlet to really explore that. So I was working on a project with Tommy Vext, who was in Divine Heresy, and then that didn't end up working out. So I basically still had, but I had a bunch of material. And I discovered a singer, this guy named Ravi Orr from Philadelphia. And I guess I the way I kind of describe it's like kind of like Muse with Chris Cornell singing.
Okay.
Some So I've been kind of slowly chipping away at that. He lives kind of far away, so we're kind of like file trading. And that's something I'm really really excited about. As far as like God forbid, I'm not really sure what's going on right now. I think everyone's kind of dealing with their own lot in life.
Right. Well,
right.
You definitely get to. I mean, I don't care who you are. You definitely get to a certain point where you have to you take a inventory of your life, and it's like, well, like the band is still important to me, but like there's also this other stuff because you've become older that is also important as well, and you want to experience that rather than like. All right, let's do the same U.S. tour we've done for the past 10 years of our lives. Like,
well, it was really important. Like, I don't know if you heard the last album, the one we did for Victory, but like we worked really, really hard on it. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy with it. I'm really proud of it. The fact that we did, and it came out great. As far as what's going to happen, with me, like after Dallas, basically when Dallas quit. Then we did like another 6 months of touring. And at the end of the Mayhem Festival, my girlfriend broke up with me. And I basically, I had like a meltdown, basically. Because I was like, I didn't care. Like, I basically almost quit the band, like, at that time. Found a way to kind of, move forward with it. But it was also like, ever since then, it's kind of like, all right, what if this band doesn't work out? Because I never really thought about it before. I'd always like, kind of assume that that's what I was going to be doing, So it's really, for me, it's still a process, but just actually asking myself the question, what do I want? Because I when I was younger, I never really had to ask that question because like I said, I didn't plan on being in a band. It just kind of I just kind of rode the wave of life, and it took me somewhere pretty cool and pretty unique. But I never sat, and I think. And then like, a few years ago, it's like a lot of the, that kind of like self-help, the secret type of literature kind of moved into the, cultural forefront. And this idea of like being able to kind of manifest your own reality, in a lot of, so I think I've been trying to infuse some of that, like, all right, what do I want? And that's an odd thing. I think I suffer a bit from option paralysis.
Oh yeah, sure.
Where like, because America really is amazing. Like it sounds, like a cliche or a platitude, but you really can do whatever you want,
right.
Unless, I mean, obviously, if you're in a wheelchair, you probably, aren't going to be joining the NFL anytime soon. But in general, there's, the world is your oyster. There's a lot of things you can really do if you're just willing to go for it. But figuring out what that one thing or whatever, kind of reassessing where I'm going has been a really interesting process. I think I've discovered that that I want to play no matter what. Actually, I subscribe to, Bob Lefsetz.
Of course, yes.
So I subscribe to his new newsletter. I try to read it every